I always say that reporting is like a storytelling, right? uh, if if in case like you read a book, right? You read a book or a children book at a bedtime story, right? Usually it has a purpose or a motto, right? And some learning that you pass on to that onto the kid, right?
Hey everybody, it's Richard here from the Experimentation podcast. Today I've got Simar on the line here. He's from OptiPhoenix. He's the CEO and founder of a A/B testing web development company based in India. Welcome to the podcast, Simar.
Hi, nice to see you again. How are you?
Yeah, good, thanks. Hey, look, early stage conversations about getting you on the podcast, and for some reason it sort of dropped in the pipeline. But here we are.
Yeah.
It's all good to see you again. So yeah, so like I was saying, Summer is actually just to introduce him to our audiences. He's the co-founder and CEO of OptiPhoenix, which is basically a, how would you describe it, a white label or early offshore development based CRO experimentation agency based in India. Although you have clients of your own, maybe you can talk us through how you got involved in this crazy world of experimentation, CRO, and go from there.
Yeah, why not? Thanks for the quick introduction, Richard. Yeah, the story goes back to 2012 when we started working as an engineer in VWO, which is the famous A/B testing
Mm-hmm.
tool. And at that time, I think you could only count the tools on fingers, right? Like that offered A/B testing or service,
Mm.
not even services, but as a platform, right? So there was probably Optimizely, there was VWO, and maybe convert.com or a few others, right? And at that time there was Google content experiments, which allowed you to just split tests, right? And there was nothing that you could do apart from split testing. So that is where our journey started back in 2012, where we learned about optimization, CRO. But then soon enough we realized that there was a big gap in the market in terms of how experimentation should be done versus how it was being carried out. Even some of the
Yep.
mature agencies at that time, when we were at VW, right, working closely with these agencies, really had me wondering that why exactly are they using the tool and the way they are using it, right? It is not how it is supposed to be used, right? Like setting up the experiments when it was supposed to run only on product detail pages, they're running on site wide. Can you imagine like the pollution in the data that they must be looking at, right? And I'm talking about some of the mature agencies here, right? And then at that time
Mm.
realized that okay, there are various tools that offer CRO, right? But there was no other CRO agency, especially in India at that time, that offered a cost affordable but more essentially an expert service, right? To really bridge that gap between how it should be done versus how it was being carried out. And that is how we started OptiPhoenix back in 2015, when there was like I was lucky enough to work with the brands like Jabra, Canon, Domino's, Subaru,
Mm.
Volkswagen, Pizza Hut, right, throughout these 9 years. And I've closely seen how they run CRO program, how some of the mature CRO agencies do this as well. And at that time, the mission was simple, right? How can we get the data faster to these agencies and organizations, right? And give them not just for data in the fastest possible manner, but also give them accurate data, right? Because as I said, the problem
Yep.
with the development is not only you need to code the A/B test, right? It is also about how you're setting up your A/B test, which is really crucial, right? Which involves targeting the right audience, targeting the right pages, integrating it with the analytics tool, which is really important to really see the data from top to bottom, right? So that is how we started, right, to really bridge that gap. And of course development and engineering has always been a, a challenge, right, in every organization, right? Doesn't matter how big your development team is, they always have a big backlog
Mm.
of things, right? And then there is of course a learning curve, right? If you want to introduce a A/B testing or a CRO as a program, You may hire a data analyst, you may hire a UI UX designer, but then you may already have an established development team, but they have to go from this learning curve of learning the tool and the technology to really set up the test right, right? And that is where the challenge is, right? You buy a tool, and I've seen agencies and organizations do this, that they buy a tool for like 50K a year and run only two A/B tests, right? Because right, they did not have
It happens. It happens. It happens in corporate A. Like I don't know. Is it too much? Too much money, not enough sense? I don't know what it is, but yeah.
yeah, yeah. So yeah, I think that is how our journey started and has evaluated since then, or evolved since then, right? Uh, so yeah, glad to have
Mm.
you on this podcast with experimentation.
So basically, like just to recap, like 2012, like I mean, in CRO rule, that was like donkey's years, 10 years ago. You're basically saying there wasn't really good sort of frameworks for doing CRO at that time, generally speaking, that you could see in the market. Well,
I think
and people weren't really using the testing tools as robust or rigidly as so robust as they would in today's sort of CRO marketing agency would do
yeah,
compared to like say 10
yeah. I
years ago.
think there were frameworks
Like
that
things
exist.
weren't as
Yeah, I think there were frameworks that existed back then, but of course they were not as mature as they are in today's market, right?
yeah.
You get to, if you search for CRO and
Mm,
how it should be done, you get to see like 10 different courses that are available that would ask you to like, hey, buy me, right? And you will learn how to do CRO. But then, of course, there were lesser courses, right, at that time, or people had a limited know-how. But yeah, even
mm,
though the ones who had the know-how, right, and essentially what these courses tell you, right, these courses are designed in a way to really help you understand the psychology, right, the buyer psychology, online psychology, how to use cognitive biases, how to do your research, what qualitative methods to look at, right, or how to evaluate the results in analytics, right? So they tell you each and everything which is related to research and hypothesis, right? But I do
mm,
not know if there are any courses which specifically talk about how to develop your test, right? How to brief your test to the developer, right? How to really run a controlled experiment, right? Because again, you could have a greatest of analytical team, right, or CRO resources that invest whole lot of time designing a hypothesis, but if that hypothesis is not run in a controlled manner, right, then that is a waste of time, right? So I think that was the missing part in the puzzle.
Hi, this is Romo Santiago from Experiment Nation. If you'd like to connect with hundreds of experimenters from around the world, consider joining our Slack channel. You can find the link in the description. Now back to the episode.
Right, that we identified that okay, I think people had the ideas that they want to test, but then that they were short on resources or had limited know-how of how to really run a controlled experiment. Because do not mind by me saying this, but majority of the A/B testing tools just simply sell this idea of that we are the easiest A/B testing tool in the market, right? Be it VW, be it
yeah,
A/B Tasty, or any other, right? So they just simply
yeah.
sell you this idea that any marketeer can go in there, right, and use their WYSIWYG editor to really make the changes, right? But that is not how it goes, right? There are a lot
Yeah, and
of
then you end
nuances.
up breaking your website with using the WYSIWYG.
Exactly. And over the last 9 or 10 years we have been into the business, there is no, not even a single experiment that we have done. And I know that I've worked very closely with certain agencies who are good friends, and that is the story that they tell me
Mm,
as well, right, that they haven't used WYSIWYG editor in years, right, to make any change, because that is how not how it works. So again, as I said, like it is selling the A/B testing tool with this idea of like it is an easiest A/B testing tool on earth, right? Versus when you
yeah,
buy it, right, you spend 50K a year and you only end up doing two experiments, right? So yeah, I think
yeah,
that was
yeah.
the
It
gap that we were
happens.
trying to solve at that point of time.
Yeah. Well, here you are, 9 years later. Look, while we get into it, I know you wanted to talk about a few topics. One was, the sort of like time spent on doing pre-test analysis. and then you run the test, and then you do post test analysis. What key points do you want to talk about that, and what kind of what do you see people go wrong there, and what have you done to sort of improve on those things as an agency?
Yeah, yeah. So again, as
Mm,
OptiPhoenix, we started with the mission of like helping the agencies, organizations do faster development, right? Whereas it naturally
yeah.
sort of inherited by us to really run a CRO program as well, right? As an agency. So as an agency, we do
Mm,
two things wherein we are doing end-to-end optimization or CRO and also the A/B test development, right? So we offer two different services, and what I've realized is that again, talking to about the courses, right, or the frameworks that are available out there, right? Generally, they all talk about how to carry your research and focus a lot on pre-test research, how to build your hypotheses, right? And even have worked with a lot of CROs as well. And what they do is they're really good at coming up with the hypotheses, right? And what they're not good at is what if that hypothesis failed, right? To really understand why it failed, right? Because if someone is offering you that you will get a 50%, 60% win rate, I think they're lying to you, right? Because a good
oh,
CRO
100%.
program, right, even when you do your research well, right, you spend a lot of time doing the research, probably you are going to get
Mm.
maybe at best 20, 25% win rate, right? Which means that out of 10 experiments that you're doing, maybe like 7 or 8 are failing, right? But what about those failing?
I completely agree. Like, yeah. Sorry
Yeah,
to interrupt. But I do remember Ronnie Kahabi saying like you should use it based, and he's one of the top dogs in
yeah,
experimentation. Like he was basically like, I mean, if he's saying this, then I take that as matter of fact. But like he was
yeah,
saying, basically you should expect a third of your experiments to win, a third to fail, and a third to be inconclusive. And
definitely,
from my experience, yeah, I would
definitely.
use that as a rough heuristic for what to
Yeah,
expect.
yeah. Since you quoted Ronnie, I remember another post from him saying that if you're getting a 10%,
Mm,
12% win rate, again, that is a false positive, right? It is very unlikely that you,
mm,
in the best scenario, that you would get such a big uplift unless there was a UX issue that you just simply solved using an A/B test, right? Or a bug, right, that you solved. Other than
I would
that,
say bug.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Other than that, your best possible bet is like a 4% or a 5% uplift with given that you are testing it
Mm,
for enough sample size, right? So again, that is what we
mm,
have found as well, that at best you get 20-25% win rate, right? But again, coming back to 70 to 75, 80% tests which lose, right? What I've seen is people spend a lot of time, a ton shit of time just going through qualitative analysis, surveys, usability testing, looking at GA, Adobe, right? But then they run a
yeah.
hypothesis which failed. It doesn't really mean that you had a bad hypothesis. It just means that maybe your execution was bad. So it is important that you're looking at the user behavior and what changes in the user behavior do you see from the data, right? And stress on that part as well, right? Doing the post test analysis, which is as important as doing the pre-test research, right? Only then you can learn from the data, pick up the insights which will actually feed your next hypothesis. So for example, size guide is a common issue, right? Sizing is a common issue in the fashion e-commerce, right, space. And you often
Yeah.
read survey responses and where people tell you that because of size I'm not able to understand what the size is, what will fit me, I'm not able to buy this product, right? This is what is refraining from me from completing my purchase. You run an A/B test experiment, you do it for 3 odd weeks, you see that okay, it was an unconclusive or a negative test, right? But does that mean that
Yeah.
you have solved the problem? No, the problem still exists, right? You just need to rework on your hypothesis, and you can only rework on your hypothesis once you actually look at the data for that you have for those 3 weeks. And if you're not looking at that data, right, it means that you're wasting your time, and it is you're not really running a CRO program, but rather you're just following tactics to really solve a bigger problem, right, which cannot be solved by tactics but a strategy, right? So you need to be strategic when running the
Mm,
tests, looking at the data, looking at various different micro goals and events that will actually dictate how the test has went, right? What changes in the user behavior you have seen, and of course will dictate the next test hypothesis that you can form out of it.
Just going back again to the post test analysis. Let's just say, like, you talk about what's that real world example of on an e-com site, fashion site. You said sizing is an issue. Let's just say you ran a test on sizing. Maybe you can give me an example, but let's just say you ran a test. Let's just say it was either inconclusive or failed. Would you go back to the hypothesis and sort of not necessarily say no, this hypothesis is wrong, but maybe I need to iterate on the hypothesis to another hypothesis and rerun the test in a different way? Does that make sense? Because I think it's very easy to. Well, I'm a fan of iterative testing, but I'm also know that we've got limited resources as well. So there's always those sort of constraints. But does that make sense? Is it
Yeah,
am I going along the same
yeah, yeah. I'm
guideline,
also a
thought
big
process as
fan
you?
of.
Like, don't necessarily scrap the hypothesis, but just sort of like think, okay, maybe the way we
Totally.
I don't know, maybe
Totally.
we need to adjust the hypothesis, or maybe even like the way the test was designed could be altered, and then we could just maybe the UX needs to be improved or whatever, and then maybe run that again.
Absolutely.
I don't know, run
Absolutely.
it
N
differently.
number of times I've seen that, and I've got a better win rate when I iterate on my losing test, right? Because if
Yeah.
you're scrapping your test hypothesis, it means that you have wasted all the time you have invested doing the research pre-test, because
Mm.
pre-test research was the one which actually made you reach to this hypothesis, right? And if that hypothesis failed and you're
Yep.
scrapping it, means you have wasted the time you have taken to test that hypothesis, and also you have wasted the time
Yep.
you invested to really get to that idea, right? So again,
Mm.
iterative testing usually, more from my experience, it gives you a better win rate compared to like testing a whole new hypothesis from scratch, right? And it is
Yeah.
important that you learn from the data. Again, if you're testing a size guide or a size chart, right? One thing, again, a common mistake that I have seen people doing is, if a test is running on a product detail page, right, and not a lot of users would simply scroll to the size guide, right? Only 50 to 60, 70% users will scroll to that portion of the page, right? Especially on mobile, right? People generally swipe through the gallery
Yep.
images, etc., and they wouldn't really swipe to that portion. And if you're looking at the whole sample size, right, it means that you're looking at a polluted sample size that contains all those users as well who did not even notice the change that you made, right? So it is really important that your A/B test is integrated with the analytical tool, where you can actually evaluate the data in much more depth, right? And how you would do that is, of course, by setting up the right events, right? One is how many users are scrolling to your change, how many users are clicking or interacting with the change, what is the conversion rate for those users who are interacting with the change, and how that has affected the funnel movement, right? If a user is interacting with your change, what is the add to cart rate for those users versus when they interact with the change in the original? Has it increased, or has it reduced?
Mm.
Whether if it has reduced, maybe the change that you made had a lot of components to it, and that actually either confused the users or distracted them, so therefore you see a lower add to cart rate, right? Or maybe your add to cart rate was better, right? Maybe you need to do something else to really convert those add to carts into conversions, right? So again, it is all about studying the data in depth, right? And not just looking at the macro goal, which is, of course, for an e-commerce is a transaction, right? That most people rely on, right?
Yeah.
And that is what matters to the stakeholders, right? But then again, if you're talking about like creating a culture of experimentation, it is not just about getting the wins on those conversions, but the learnings that you, or the insights that you get from those A/B tests that can answer certain other business questions.
Maybe let's segue into like while you're there talking about like the importance of macro versus micro goals, because I know like yeah, to a stakeholder they're probably just kind of wanting to know, okay, for an ecom how many people went to the checkout and actually made a final conversion. But you know I don't know about you, but like in Australia at least, like we don't we're a small country compared to like say the States or
Yeah.
many countries in Europe. So we can't like we don't have the population to always hit stat sig for
Yes.
final conversion. Like like we might set the primary like for instance, I might set the primary metric as okay. add to cart and then have a secondary metric as final conversion or something like that, and it might not even reach that like for that secondary metric, it might not even meet stat sig for that, but it might hit stat sig for adding to cart and going to checkout. So maybe just talk about those sort of traffic implications, and also like in the context of primary and sorry macro and micro goals.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Again, I think for stakeholders, as you mentioned, right, what matters to them is how much revenue uplift have I got, right? But then again, that is a
Mm.
bigger picture. But if you're not looking at the micro goals, you're not never going to achieve a lot of it in the macro goal either, right? Because if you're running a
Mm.
test and you're just focusing on macro goal and not the micro goal, so for example, if I go back to a sizing test, right, and if you run that as a test, you see, okay, the test was inconclusive, let me just try out another test, and that failed as well, right? So which means that you're not really caring about how users reacted to the change, and you're just probably guessing why it may not have worked, right, without really looking at
Yeah.
why, right, and what change in the user behavior did it make, right? So there are a lot of things, a lot of tests that you actually run behind a certain screen, right? So for example, if you're running or optimizing the menu, right, which is behind the hamburger, right? So if you're again
Yeah.
including the entire sample size and not just looking at that specific event for those users who actually clicked on the hamburger menu, again you're just simply looking at a polluted sample size, right? If you're making your change in the fourth fold or third fold, right, and you're not caring about how many users actually scroll till the change and how did these users convert, right? If you're making a test on a login sign up pop-up, right, you need to understand that that pop-up might be present across the site, but again, how many users are actually seeing that pop-up, or in the case with the mini cart as well, or the side cart, right, which is present site wide, but then how many users are opening that side cart, right? So I think again, micro goals are super important. Understanding the user behavior, because you can only understand the user behavior and connect the dots, right? If you're evaluating those micro goals, and I always say that reporting is like a storytelling, right? uh, if
Mm.
if in case like you read a book, right, you read a book or a children book at a bedtime story, right, usually it has a purpose or a motto, right, and some learning that you pass on to that onto the kid, right? And I've realized this recently because I have a 1.5-year-old toddler, right, to which I read stories, and there is some motto, right, and that is how I connected this. That even your reporting when you're doing it for an experiment is like a story, right? You're actually you're telling a
Mm.
story that you saw this because of which there was a change in this particular metric, and since users behaved in this manner, we saw this change in the bottom line, or we did not see the change because this did not work, right? So you what you have essentially done is you have connected the dots and passed on the learnings from that experiment, right? So each report should
Yeah.
have that motto, right? That is, what are you passing to the business, right? What exactly is is what you're passing on to the end client, right? That is what matters, right? It is not just like how much improvement have you done on the revenue or conversion rate. That will eventually follow, right? If you're doing the
Can I ask,
experiment, yeah.
can I ask you a question? Let's just say like your macro goal was like obviously like check out some good and basically form conversion or e-commerce conversion, but you had all these different micro goals like I don't know, scroll depth and users going further through the funnel, like from
Mhm.
first to second and second to third. Like let's say like you didn't, it was inconclusive in terms of reaching the let's just say your primary metric was e-commerce conversions. Let's say that was inconclusive or didn't reach stat sig, but let's just say you saw that there was definitely improvements in the secondary objectives or the micro conversions like scroll depth and users going through the stages of the funnel more. Would you make a call in that case of calling that test in some sense a winner and putting that into production, like on the user's side, even though the primary metric wasn't conclusive.
Mm-hmm. A very good question, Richard. And
Yeah,
I
I'm
have,
asking because you're talking about
yeah,
improving the usability and then that
definitely,
sort of thing.
definitely. And there are scenarios where your micro macro goal might not be 100% or 95% statistically confident, and you still go ahead and call
Yeah,
that test as a win. And that is how I see it, right? That if you see a statistical confidence and enough sample size for your micro goals, wherein you have increased add to basket rate, you have
yeah,
some other, like checkouts are more, right? And also there is some increase in the transactions as well, although they might not be
yeah,
statistically confident because you did not gather that much sample size. You have run the test for
yeah,
enough duration, or maybe you have run the test for enough duration and still the results are inconclusive for your macro goal, but you still see that on a positive side, right? That maybe there is a 2% uplift,
yeah,
1.5% uplift. And if the change is, it takes lesser amount of effort to code, right? And we can clearly see
mm,
that it has improved the user experience, right? Then I would want to call that test as a win, right?
yeah,
And even though maybe we not might not have. So again, if it is not hurting the conversions and we still see a positive revenue per visitor, revenue per session, or conversion rate, along with higher add to baskets, checkouts, scrolls, etc., or PDP movement, right?
mm,
And that test is a low cost test, right, to implement. I would still want to go ahead and call that as a win because that has increased
yeah,
uh, certain metrics that matters. And eventually, of course, not every user is going to convert on that same session, right? Users are going to convert at a later point as well. So again, the
yeah,
short answer is it depends, right, on the scenario. But yes, it is
yeah.
not always that you would call a test as a win only if your macro goal is 95% statistically confident.
Yeah, that's what I'm pointing to because, like, yeah, like I'm trying to read between the lines of yes, we didn't seek for the macro goal, but we can clearly see the users are more engaged with the page and they're going for the funnel further and more add to carts and so forth. But and yeah, like it is a bit of a judgment call. Yes, you could argue you could be implementing a false positive in regards to the primary metric, but if you could also argue that we're improving the user experience. So
Yeah.
yeah. Hey, just in regards to these sort of things, you did talk about I think for the show you wanted to talk about outsourcing A/B test development. And when it comes to companies that want to engage with a company like yourself, what would you say? Like, what kind of advice would you give them in regards to when to outsource, when to not outsource your A/B test development?
Yeah. So I think when not to outsource the A/B test development, I would say
Mm,
that if you already have a well-defined processes, right, and you have enough bandwidth and the program is going well, I necessarily do not need to like offshore, right? Because again, if it is all working well for you, why would we want to disturb that synergy, right?
mm,
But even if you have, in some certain cases, even if you have a well-established processes, right, but you still want to actually have an extra hand, right? What you can still do is you can get a resource from offshore who can just amalgamate into your existing processes and team and just work as a part of your
yeah,
team, right? Attending your stand-ups, doing the way that you work, right? The thing is, and what advantage does it give it back to you is you do not necessarily need to hire someone in house, right? Just because you maybe last year you were doing 5 tests a month, you are now increasing that velocity to 7 or 8 tests per experiments per month, for which you might need an additional resource. So one way to go about is you hire someone, right? Then again, if you hire someone, you need to manage their vacations, you need to manage their assets, need to manage their insurances and whatnot, right? And then of course there is a training period that you need to invest, right? Whereas if you want to like quickly scale, right, what you can do is of course hire someone from an agency like OptiPhoenix, Ecologics, or there are maybe a couple of other agencies as well, right, who offer this as a service, right? and simply get a person who is well trained on these tools and processes, right, and who has been doing it for
Yep.
years, and simply have an addition to your team. So basically it allows you for a quick scale up of how you can actually get your program up and running in a shorter amount of time, right, instead of like hiring a new resource, training them up, and then getting them accustomed to your processes.
What I find is, yeah, working internally in a company, yeah, there's all kinds of resource constraints, and the internal developers or webmasters in a company, they've already got their own work to do, and often if it comes down to doing A/B tests, that's like another sort of thing that gets added onto like their to-do lists, but it's not really a primary part of their job. And um, I think the advantage of us using the agency partner in that sense is being able to leverage off a company that's already got skilled A/B test developers. They're not just normal engineers; like they know how to actually use the platform, and they've been doing it for years, and they can just go and jump in and do it. Whereas if you're using your own engineers and you're just getting into A/B testing, they're going to have to read the docs. They're going to have to. They're probably going to make a lot of. To be honest with you, they're
Absolutely.
probably going to make a lot of errors in QA and stuff like that, because that's just how you
Yeah.
learn, right? But
Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
absolutely. I think that is the second use case, right? If you have a well-established processes in place, you can hire someone who is an addition to your team, and they can adhere to the processes that you
mm,
have already defined. That is one use case. The other use
yeah,
case is you do not have someone in the team who is equipped with A/B test development, right? They might be a good front-end engineer, but that doesn't necessarily mean that
yeah,
they know how to set up a test, right? It is not even about coding a test, it is about setting up the test, right? Setup involves coding, integrations, audience targeting, setting up goals, matrices, etc., right? So again,
yep. And the QA is a huge thing that gets missed. I've noticed. I think that's one of the. Would you say QA is one of the biggest things that why a test fails, or one of the
this is how I rate it, right? And we have done some analysis internally as well, because we have run about 10,000
mm,
experiments over the last 10 years, right? And what we have realized
yep,
is that the number one issue is, of course, maybe your test hypothesis was wrong. That is one. But the second
yeah,
is, of course,
yep,
your QA was not done accurately, right? So of course
yeah,
there were bugs in your experiment that actually because of which it failed, and we have learned our course as well. It is not that we haven't. Over the years, what we have realized is that 65% of the time, if you're spending 100 hours doing the development, you need to spend 65% of your time doing the QA on an average, right? In some cases it may be like you need to invest more time doing the QA versus what you're spending on development. That depends upon certain scenarios or use cases, but on an
yep,
average what we have realized is the sweet spot is about 65% of the time should go into the QA for your experiment to really make sure that your experiment is robustly set up, right? And QA does not really mean you're just testing functional and visual things, right? It is also about making sure your test is properly integrated, it is running for the right set of audience, right set of pages, and all your goals and metrics are tracking correctly. Because if they are not right, even if your test is visually functionally working well, and if you're getting a wrong set of data, right, that is of no use,
yeah.
right? So either you're getting false positive or false
Well,
negative.
I've been in those situations. I've been in that situation. I'm like, just what the hell? Like, what's the?
Yeah,
I've been in that situation where it wasn't firing. That must be due to not the testing tool. It was due to I won't go into the reason, but there was a technical reason which was affecting the testing tool. And I was like, what the hell's the point of using this tool when it's like
yeah,
completely showing a different conversion rate to what our site is showing? So I was just like, okay, I'll just use the tool for like the visual experience, and then I'll just go into GA for the post test analysis, because I was
yeah,
like, I
100%.
can't trust this right now.
100%. And one
Yeah.
of the things that I would advise all the optimizers, QA specialists, engineers to do is to really
Mm,
run your experiments
mm,
on a cookie or IP address. Like set the test live and test it, right? Do not just test it on preview mode, because preview mode, depending upon the tool, has certain restrictions on how it behaves, right? It is always best to
yeah.
test your test on a live a cookie or a IP address or a query parameter, right? So that you can really see the data flowing, reports getting populated correctly, visitor count being shown fine, right? If this and you can really test in a live environment. That is how we usually do it for all our tests that we do.
That's good advice. And look, actually, we talked about the advantages of outsourcing development already. So look, I'm up to 7:30 Australian time. So, is there anything else you think our audiences would like to hear from you, Simar?
I believe, yeah, the thing that I love the most is data, and just do not simply rely on the data for like pre-test research, right? And that is what I wanted
Yeah.
to communicate with this session today as well. That focus a lot on your micro goals and that will dictate the user behavior, right? And that will help you understand why your test hypothesis won or failed. So yeah, that would be
Yeah.
my single piece of advice. And of course, don't let the development be the bottleneck of your experimentation program, right? Because that is generally the
Mm.
case even with the large organizations as well, that A/B testing usually takes a backseat where it shouldn't, because ideally it should be the process should be idea should lead to the design, and design should be first A/B tested before it goes to the product team and then to the development team. So I think the layer that is missing in many organizations is that the, there is no experimentation that is done, and largely it is because they do not have the development resources to carry out those experiments, right? So rather than going it directly to the product team and then development team, I think it should first go to the engineering to really be A/B tested, and then
Mm.
uh, I think only the winning tests or the learnings from those A/B tests should be implemented.
Good advice. Let's leave it at that. And how can our audiences contact you if they want to get to know you more and get in touch?
Yeah, absolutely. You can reach out to me on LinkedIn, or you can reach out to me on email, which is quite easy. That is my first name, Simar, at optiphoenix.com. That would be the best way. And happy to take any questions that
Yep.
the audiences may have. And happy to see what they have to say.
Cool. Thanks, Sima. And thanks for being on the podcast. Cheers. Bye.
Cheers. Bye.
Hi, this is Romo Santiago from Experiment Nation. If you'd like to connect with hundreds of experimenters from around the world, consider joining our Slack channel. You can find the link in the description. Now back to the episode.